Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel for another video, and in this one we're going to be talking about how your army affects your mission within 11th edition of Warhammer 40,000. So let's get into it. Now, in the previous video I went over how detachments are changing, and this sort of ties into that. So basically, each detachment will now give you one or more force dispositions, which is, they say, are usually tied to how that particular force or detachment would would perform in battle. So in previous mission packs, the way you built your army didn't have much of an impact. So, say if you played World Eaters, your Corn Berserkers had to be the utility men. They had to do everything. They had to hold objectives, they had to take objectives, they had to kill stuff to get victory points and all of that sort of stuff. And then, or another example they gave is Fire Warriors basically doing the charge of the Light Brigade in order to secure a few extra victory points. Now, the way we've designed these new missions is to encourage you to complete the sort of objectives that your army composition would naturally go for. So, let's elaborate more into what they say. When you build your army, your detachments each unlock a different force disposition, one of which you will choose to represent your army's force disposition for each battle. This establishes the broad mission your army would likely be assigned to accomplish. Like any good general, however, you'll determine the manner in which you achieve that mission based upon real battlefield conditions on the ground. By comparing your chosen force disposition to your opponents at the start of a battle, you'll find out the more specific details of the mission you'll be playing. So there's 5 force dispositions, easy for me to say, in total. So you have Take and Hold, Disruption, Purge the Foe, Priority Assets, and Reconnaissance. So each of these, they say, are geared towards thematic mission objectives. So say if you choose Purge the Foe, you'll often score victory points by wiping out units and killing things. Whilst opting for Disruption, you might need to do actions in enemy territory or occupy key terrain pieces on the battlefield. Whilst these missions are designed to create a narrative in every game, they're still tightly balanced around each other. Asymmetrical in nature, but still fair, telling an authentic Warhammer story between two well-matched forces. Almost all will still score some measure of points for holding objectives on the battlefield. So, board control isn't completely off the table, but it's not your only option to score either. And some will go either way with that balance. Some might reward more board control, some you might not need to do as much. But it does mean that unless you both pick the same disposition, you and your opponent will be having different primary objectives for the game, creating a fun tactical challenge that writes its own story using their words. So it's basically using the general game mechanics to tell an overall story, which is cool, kind of melding the world of narrative and regular gameplay together, even more so than they have done in the past. So, the example I give here, in pick-up games, you can choose a different force disposition ahead of every battle. In a tournament, you'll lock it in. So basically how we suspected such a thing would work anyway. You're not going to be flip-flopping your dispositions in the tournament, because that would be a form of tailoring, which is very bad tournament etiquette. Since each force disposition has 5 distinct missions, one for each other disposition, you can therefore control the level of complexity in terms of which mission rules and combinations you need to learn. So they give an outline of the mission sequence with the image here. So the first, obviously, muster your armies. So your army list basically. Number 2, determine the missions. Number 3, determine deployment. We'll come back to the optional step of twist in a moment. Number 4, lay out and create the battlefield. Number 5, determine who's attacking and defending. And number 6, selecting your secondaries. Now to go on about, they mentioned deployment cards, which will be familiar to numerous players. So you have classic matchups in like Dawn of Warhammer and Anvil Tipping Point. Each mission pairing also has 3 recommended terrain layouts, using specific deployments designed to give both players a balanced battlefield to fight through. Or you can customise, switch and match as you want. But they're giving you, if you just want to set up a quick board and get the battling, you've got recommended setups to pick from. And then the secondaries pretty much work as they do currently, allowing players to choose fixed or tactical objectives to either stick with their favourites or draw cards from a deck for a chance of higher scoring. So it doesn't look like secondaries are changing that much. Tactical objectives, however, have been given one significant change. Instead of only having 2 at any given time, now you'll draw 2 objective cards every turn and keep a hold of the ones you haven't scored yet. So you don't need to worry about an early draw ruining your later game plans. This could be a decent change. It's worth noting that each primary mission has a total cap of 45 victory points per game and a cap of 15 victory points per battle round, with the same for secondary missions, so you can't basically sit tight on everything and go for a blitz on points at the end. You do have caps, so it's a case of how quickly you want to fill those cups. And now we come, I mentioned an optional thing when I was going through the steps, twist. Now, here is how twists work. They also return as an optional mechanic that can modify core rules or introduce unexpected challenges. One example they give can allow all units to move through terrain like nimble infantry, whilst another can cause both players to completely swap their primary objectives around. So, yeah, plenty of mayhem could be had with those. And that pretty much concludes everything. As far as how that works, the rest of the article just goes into plugging the chapter approved mission deck in the Armageddon box. But yeah, that is basically how objectives and such, well, how missions, will be changing within 11th edition. So what do you guys think? As always, let me know in the comments and I shall catch you in the next video. Bye.